You don't think of yourself as someone who's pretending. That's the first thing. Because when people hear that word, pretending, they imagine something obvious. Someone acting, or being fake, or putting on a version of themselves. And that's not how you see yourself. You're aware. You're honest. You've looked at yourself more than most people. At least that's what you believe. But pretending doesn't always look like acting. Sometimes it looks like adjusting. Subtle, quiet, almost invisible. A moment where you don't say what you were about to say, where you soften something before it leaves your mouth, or where you feel something clearly but choose something safer instead. And you don't call that pretending. You call that being reasonable, being in control. You call that knowing how to handle things. But if you slow down just a little, there's a pattern there. And once you see it, it's hard to ignore. Welcome back to Sparks of Insight. I'm Darren Sparks. Most people think hiding is obvious, that you would know if you were doing it, that it would feel forced or fake or uncomfortable. But real hiding doesn't feel like that. It feels normal. It feels like you. That's why it's hard to see, because you're not lying, you're not putting on an act, you're just not letting everything through. And over time, that becomes your default. You start adjusting without thinking. You start choosing what feels acceptable instead of what's actually there. And it happens fast. So fast you don't even register the moment it changes. Something comes up inside you, and before it fully forms, it's already been reshaped, edited, reworded, or dropped completely. And because it's automatic, you assume it's natural. You assume that's just how you are. But that wasn't always there. That pattern was built, reinforced over time, through moments where being direct didn't work, where being honest created friction, or where saying what was real made things harder than they needed to be. So you adapted, not all at once, just little adjustments, small shifts, each one making things smoother, each one making things easier. And over time, those adjustments stacked until they became your normal way of being. And now you don't even question it because it works. You can move through conversations easily. You can navigate people without conflict and keep things stable. And stability feels right. It feels like control. But there's a cost to that. Not something obvious, just something subtle. A slight distance between you and what's actually happening inside you. You're present, but not fully. You're engaged, but not completely. You're there, but something is always held back. And you don't notice it most of the time, because everything still functions. Life still moves. Conversations still happen. Nothing breaks. But if you pay attention, there's a difference. Certain moments feel flat. Certain interactions feel incomplete, like something didn't fully land or connect. And it's easy to assume it's external, that it's the situation or the other person or just how things are. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's the space between what you felt and what you allowed through. And that space creates distance. Because real connection doesn't happen through what's filtered. It happens through what's actually there. And if what's actually there never fully shows up, then something always feels slightly off. Not enough to question, just enough to feel. And most people live there, right on that edge, where everything looks fine, but nothing feels fully real. And the reason is simple. It's not that they're pretending on purpose. It's that they've gotten so used to adjusting, they don't see it anymore. It feels like identity. It feels like who they are. But there's a difference between who you are and how you've learned to operate. And if you don't question that, you end up living inside the pattern without ever seeing it until something shifts, usually not in a big way, just a small amount, where you catch it, where you notice yourself about to say something, and you feel the adjustment happen right there in real time. You feel the original thought and the edited version at the same time. And for a second, there's a gap, a clear difference between the two. And at that moment, it's uncomfortable because now you see it. Now it's not invisible anymore. It's not automatic. It's a choice. And in that moment, you can go back to the pattern, or you can let something through, unedited. Not to prove anything, not to force honesty, just to not interfere. And when you do that, it feels different. Not dramatic, just direct, unfiltered, and slightly exposed. And that exposure is what most people avoid. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. There's no control in it, no guarantee, no way to shape how it lands. It just is what it is, and that's uncomfortable. So the instinct is to pull back, go back to what works, or go back to what feels safe. But once you've seen the difference, you can't completely ignore it. You start noticing it more, in small ways, in everyday moments. You see how often you adjust, how often you hold something back, without even thinking about it. And that awareness doesn't force change. It just creates space. Space between you and the pattern. And that space matters because anything you can see, you're no longer fully inside of. It's no longer automatic. It's something you can notice, something you can feel, something you can choose, even if you don't always choose differently. And over time, that changes things. You become a little less controlled, a little less filtered. You become more present with what's actually there. And that doesn't make life easier. It doesn't make interactions smoother. In fact, sometimes it creates more friction, but it feels more real, and that's the difference. Not better or worse, just real. And once you feel that, even briefly, you start to see how much of your life has been shaped by adjustment. Not because you wanted to hide, but because it worked. It helped you navigate. It helped you avoid unnecessary problems. But it also kept something contained, something that never fully came through. And that's what most people live with. Not fully disconnected, just slightly removed from themselves and others, from what's actually happening in the moment. And they don't question it because it's consistent, it's familiar, and stable. But stable doesn't mean true. It just means practiced. And if you never interrupt that practice, it just keeps going, quietly, until one day you start noticing it more clearly. Not all at once, just enough to see it. And once you see it, you don't really go back to not seeing it. You might still follow the pattern. You might still adjust. But now there's awareness. And awareness changes the experience. Because now you can feel the difference between what's edited and what isn't. Between what's safe and what's actually there. And that's where this shifts. Not into action, not into change, just into clarity. And clarity doesn't force anything. It just shows you what's happening without needing to fix it, without needing to resolve it, just seeing it. And sometimes that's enough. Thank you everyone for watching. And remember, the spark is within you.